Here it is, the last relic of an escalating arms race and a graphics card that we will never see the likes of again. This is the GTX 690. For those of you who have been following my channel over the years, you're probably aware that I have, an unhealthy obsession with multi-GPU setups, and long for the days when systems using 2, 3, or even 4 graphics cards was not only the pinnacle of opulence, but also the pinnacle of performance. But with the notable exception of one video I made almost 5 years ago now, I haven't taken a look at any of the really crazy stuff that came out during the time when Nvidia and ATI/AMD were trying to one-up each other with every release. So when the opportunity presented itself to take a look at the GTX 690, the last consumer-focused dual GPU card that we will ever likely see from Nvidia, I couldn't wait to get this thing on the bench. What's that? Dual GPUs? Yeah, that used to be a thing. Nvidia and, at the time, ATI were so closely matched between about 2006 and 2012 that they figured out the only way to really get a leg up was to package two of their highest end products together and sell it as one mega video card. The GTX 690 was released in 2012 and featured two of their top-end GTX 680 dies hanging out on one substrate. When we take a look at the back of the card, you can clearly see them at each end. And the reason they were so far apart is that the single axial style fan was parked in the middle. If we take a look down below the fan, you can see the airflow channels directing the downflow outward and over the cooling fins. Because of the way the shroud was constructed, you had air exiting on both ends of the card, which was a completely different setup from the way the 680 reference cards handled cooling, with one end blocked off and a turbine-style fan handling air movement. From a modern viewpoint, I guess it's pretty amazing that this thing only cost $1,000 at launch, but Nvidia made a much more on-brand move with the GTX Titan Z 2 years later, hitting consumers with a $3,000 price tag. This made little sense as it was based on two GTX 780 Ti, which cost $700 each, and could replicate the performance of the Titan Z in a simple SLI setup. But this was back when the Titan class cards were still targeted at quote-unquote professional workloads, but then poof, that was all she wrote for multi-GPU cards forever and until the end of time. Seeing as the 690 is essentially a permanent SLI setup, I expected to encounter some of the standard hiccups during installation. However, I was pleasantly surprised to find that Nvidia Control Panel immediately recognized the card and enabled multi-GPU, although unlike with an actual SLI rig, you don't see any mention of Nvidia's proprietary moniker. This was amazingly easy to get working, and I verified everything was being recognized by checking in with MSI Afterburner, which saw two unique dies and memory setups. However, this is where things got unpleasant. It's not necessarily a function of this card being multi-GPU. It's not a function of anything being physically wrong with the card, of having a corrupted VBIOS, or operating in any kind of improper way. It's just old. In 2021, Nvidia announced that it was officially discontinuing support for 600 and 700 series GPUs with their driver releases. And as you could probably see on screen, this caused many a problem when trying to launch, well, most games. I tried F122, which gave me a warning about the age of my graphics driver before giving me a glimmer of hope and then crashing. I tried Halo Infinite, which despite being a new download and also me attempting a repair of the game files, wouldn't even load at all. I tried Far Cry 6, which crashed as soon as it tried to load any game assets. Guardians of the Galaxy told me that I straight up didn't have a suitable DX12 graphics adapter. Cyberpunk gave me a little hope by loading into the secondary load screen, but then flatlining, as it said. And Dirt 5 said that I didn't have a compatible graphics card installed, which I double-checked and I think I do. But even the games and or programs that I could get to run suffered in one way or another due to no fault of the GTX 690 itself. It was actually working great, as evidenced by my system info displaying during a Firestrike run. Both graphics processors were active, boosting appropriately and drawing anywhere from 110 to 130 watts. They even stayed relatively cool. The problems, however, were twofold. Take a look at this TimeSpy run, a benchmark that does support SLI. Note that the 2GB of VRAM is maxed out, causing all kinds of performance problems. This is one of the issues with SLI, as it doesn't create a shared memory pool. Although there is technically 4 gigs of VRAM on the GTX 690, because of the way SLI technology draws frames, it is limited to the lowest amount on any single card. So this 4GB GTX 690 is actually a 2GB GTX 690. I also tried out titles like Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Wolfenstein Youngblood, where I experienced kind of a combo problem. The biggest Achilles heel of SLI setups has always been that the technology relies entirely on game developers putting the time and effort into their titles to include SLI support. If it's not coded in, SLI either won't function correctly or won't function at all. In Tomb Raider and Wolfenstein, not only was I running into the VRAM limitation issue, even at 1080p low, but SLI was also not functioning correctly. I will say that I am kind of happy that it even sort of worked, as you can see some small percentage of load on GPU 2, but you can tell that these are not official SLI titles. And then of course are the games that basically don't even recognize that a second GPU is even present. Thankfully, Red Dead Redemption 2, Metro Exodus, and Borderlands 3 did all load right up, but I can't say that the game experience was exactly earth-shattering. Red Dead even made me go into the menu and keep turning graphics settings down or off until I got under the VRAM cap. But even the other two weren't giving me playable frame rates on what was essentially a single GTX 680 from 10 years ago. Even the game capture here was clearly poor, as NVENC isn't a thing that existed in 2012. So all this frustration for a card that I'm oddly nostalgic for. Why? I don't expect any hardware from this long ago to still be able to power through modern software or games. That's just foolish. Sure, you can extend the life of something like an aging processor with more system memory or maybe different storage, but something like the GTX 690 is basically as good as it'll ever be as soon as you take it out of the box. It wasn't meant to play these games, but that doesn't mean that I can't try. What I miss is hardware manufacturers really swinging for the fences. Sure, now an RTX 4090 feels pretty mighty, but I think that's probably more a function of hardware evolution just slowing down across the board. Nvidia doesn't have ATI or AMD pushing them to the limits, forcing them to come up with new products that essentially break the pre-established rules in the pursuit of ultimate performance. When ATI brought out the HD 5970 to fight against the GTX 400 series, Nvidia really had to double down on the biggest weapon they had available, and that was SLI. The GTX 690 is a relic of a bygone time, when silicon manufacturers faced competition in the market and the scrutiny of consumers who were not yet beholden to their favorite team no matter what. Maybe I miss SLI, but perhaps more I miss the days when I had hair on my head and a choice between killer products from multiple companies, and neither of them were the wrong one. We'll probably never see a multi-GPU video card ever again, and that's a real shame. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and I'll see you next time.